Howdy, folks. How's it going? Good? Sweet. I'm well. I'm excited to be here. They are barring the doors, locking them. You guys are trapped with me for the next 75 minutes, so let's have a good time with it. My name is Ryan J. Salva. I am a product lead over in the Visual Studio team. Specifically, my team owns the Visual Studio tools for Apache Cordova, which just went to RC, like 3, 4, 5 days ago, something like that, very, very soon ago. After a year of being in CTPs and sending out multiple previews, we finally made it into the box. Super excited about it, and I'm excited to kind of talk to you guys a little bit about today. Just a quick note about my style. Please, I beg you guys, interrupt me. If we're going to be in here for the next 75 minutes together, let's make it a practical learning hour plus. Yeah?
Can you unlock the doors?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's out of my control. They forced me to do it. Yeah. I was told that I have to repeat all questions. The gentleman asked, could we please unlock the doors? And the answer was no. So, but yeah, please interrupt me. Ask questions. Tell me if I talk too fast. I know that I have a tendency to get a little overexcited sometimes. If you want to, stop the room and say hi. All of these talks are being recorded. Your mom may want to hear from you, right? So just keep it relaxed. Today, we're going to go through the basics of using Cordova to build mobile applications for iOS, Android, and Windows. The demonstrations that I give are going to be really kind of on the basic conceptual side of things to give you some of the sort of baseline practical tools that you need in order to get started. We're not going to try to build a fully functioning whiz-bang-boink app. Really, I just want to make sure that you guys understand the basic concepts and know how to get started when you kind of crack open the project for the first time. Sound good? Yeah? Excellent. All right. So let's start by taking a trip in the Wayback Machine. We're going to go back to 2010. The first Expendables had just came out. The nation was recovering from a financial crisis. Natalie Portman had just really shown us how crazy she could be in Black Swan, and somehow I don't know what was going on, but Keisha had the #1 hit of 2010, according to, it was a crazy time. But in that time, really, amongst the development community, the mobile development community, the really fashionable thing to do was really still to be building mobile web, to be building responsive websites. I'm pretty sure Bootstrap was coming out maybe about that time as well. The iPhone had been out for about 2 years. And the way that most of us as developers really got our content out to consumers and in the business was through the mobile web. Now, fast forward a little bit, come back on to today, and the mobile web, frankly, from a browser consumption standpoint, is kind of evaporating underneath our feet. Between 2013 and 2014, the data went from 20% in browser to only 14% in browser. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The mobile web didn't provide access to a lot of the things that we expect and that we love about apps. They didn't provide access to some native device capabilities. For example, if you wanted to access the camera or the accelerometer or the device contacts, you couldn't do that from the mobile web. If you wanted to support offline scenarios, you couldn't do that either. You had to have an internet connection. And maybe even one of the more important pieces of that was that the mobile web, it wasn't really easy to monetize it. Unless you were selling objects that were going to ship via the U.S. Postal Service, if you were trying to sell content, there was no real gateway in order to monetize your software. And so as time went on, we really started to adopt apps as kind of mobile developers as the primary way that we deliver content. So keeping that landscape in mind, that doesn't mean that web technologies have gone away. In fact, if you look at the technologies, and this is a survey from Vision Mobile, one of their more recent quarterly mobile developer surveys. It looked at what the most popular, most well-known technologies were among mobile developers. And these were people building for iOS and Android and Windows and BlackBerry and everything in between. And almost everyone knows HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We've had 25 years to get really freaking good at it, maybe more than that. So there's a lot of knowledge built up, and there's a lot of community built up, and there's a lot of open source technology that we can take advantage of easily. At the same time, just because we all know web doesn't necessarily mean that we're using it frequently. But actually, when you kind of look at it, and this is from the same survey, web technologies, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are right behind the native platforms, the native languages, Objective-C and Java, when it comes to ways that mobile developers are delivering their mobile applications. So web technology is really, really important inside of the app economy as well. Bless you. So keeping all that in mind, let's talk about the role that Apache Cordova plays in that. Now, from a pure numbers standpoint, let's talk about kind of where Apache Cordova is in terms of adoption. It's about 6% of apps in the stores at large. This is in the Google Play and the iOS stores. If you narrow that down a little bit to apps in kind of business categories, and you might think of this as line of business applications, it jumps up to about 14%. These are fairly recent numbers. I think I pulled these maybe a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. So there's a lot of apps out there, of the hundreds of thousands of apps that are built for iOS, Android, and Windows using web technologies. I didn't have this number up there, but the Windows Store, I'm going to misquote this, but it's near 50% of applications in the Windows Store are built on web technologies as well. A lot of people love XAML, C#, it's great, but web tech is where we are familiar and where a lot of us, myself included, are most productive. So keeping that kind of industry momentum in mind and kind of where it's at as a platform, let's talk about what it is, right? So Cordova, first and foremost, is an open source framework. It was originally built by the Natobi Corporation back in 2009, eventually sold to Adobe. When it was sold to Adobe, it retained its brand name at that time of PhoneGap. Those of you may have heard of PhoneGap. And it was open sourced as Cordova. So anytime you hear someone talking about PhoneGap and Cordova, often it's pretty much used synonymously. It's really the same technology. Sometimes when people talk about PhoneGap, what they're really talking about is the cloud build service that Adobe provides. But as an underlying technology, they're both the same thing. From an architectural standpoint, it's fundamentally a web application that is packaged inside of a native container. So that means that what you send out, what you actually install on your machine, is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. In the case of Android and iOS, those web technologies live inside of a web view that are wrapped in this native application. In the case of iOS, that's an Xcode application written in Objective-C. In the case of Android, that's a Java application. In the case of Windows, and this is a little bit of a technicality, but hey, while we're here, might as well indulge. It's actually running natively as a web application inside of Windows. Because Windows can run JavaScript natively, there's no reason to wrap it inside of a web view. And so you do realize some relatively important performance and memory benefits just by being on Windows, since it can run natively there. Now, one of the great benefits here is that HTML, that CSS, and that JavaScript that you're packaging up and sending off to each of the respective stores, you're not writing that JavaScript and that HTML and that CSS multiple times. You're just writing it once, the same way that we did 5, 10, 15 years ago with web applications. The same applies here. You're just writing the code once. It is really just the wrapper that gets changed out from store to store. Now, you may be asking yourself, though, well, if it's just web technologies, how do you get access to the native device capabilities that we were talking about earlier? The reason that a lot of developers moved from mobile web to building native applications. Well, the answer to that is these things called Cordova plugins. So Cordova plugins basically provide a bridge between your web application and the native code. They are asynchronous calls. so that anytime you want to speak to the native code, you've got a common JavaScript API that you use. That JavaScript API talks over to the native code, it returns back a response, and then your JavaScript can do what it will with it. So let me give you an easy example and one that we'll actually use in a demo later on. Let's say that you want to grab a photo from the camera. You'll make an asynchronous call to the native code. Once the native code actually gets a photo from the camera, it will return back a base64 encoded image, and then you can embed that in your app or send it off to the server somewhere, something like that. Does that make sense? Yeah, head nodding, thumbs up, all good? Excellent. I like a vocal crowd. Give me a response. All right, so let's dig a little bit deeper into this, and let's talk about what the actual process looks like, specifically the build process. Okay, this is easy enough. We all start by file new, create project. That's easy, all right. That gives us a Cordova project. Now, I've got a couple of different parts here. I'm going to go ahead and say the parts that are in yellow, is that legible as yellow? Can we tell what's yellow and what's white? Yeah? All right. So the parts that are yellow are what you bring to the game. This is your HTML that you're writing, your CSS, your JavaScript, your assets. And what I mean by assets here are really things like images, MP3s, videos, whatever you're going to use there. There's also the configuration that you specify for your application, things like the application name, what icons you're going to use, what splash image you're going to use when the application is first loading, that kind of stuff. And then there's all of that which Cordova provides. You don't ever need to crack this open. You don't really need to worry about it at all, but it's helpful to know that it's there. There's the platform code for each one of the ecosystems, the iOS, the Android, and the Windows code. And there's the plugin code as well. When you pull down a plugin, like 95% of the time, you're going to be pulling down a plugin that already exists out in the wild. There's something like 1,300 or 1,400 plugins that have already been developed by the community, many of them curated and maintained by Microsoft and vetted for quality and updated regularly. So usually you're not going to have to deal with kind of what's inside of those plugins, but it is helpful to know that each plugin is essentially comprised of 4 parts. There is the common JavaScript API, and then there is the native code that needs to be written for iOS, Android, and Windows. That native code will get broken apart when we build. So, now we build. It actually breaks apart and creates 3 projects. Frankly, you never even really need to see those projects. But once again, it's helpful to know what's happening under the hood, right? So we create those underneath the hood, create those 3 Visual Studio projects, or 3 projects. One of them's a Visual Studio project, one of them's an Xcode project, and one of them's an Android project. Note that your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, your web technologies have essentially been stamped out into each one of those projects, and then each of the kind of native code follows along with you. Then all of that gets built into the actual native packages that you will then take to the app stores and go through the normal submission process, or maybe you'll use a side-loading service or a mobile application management service like Intune, and you'll just provide those to your employees, contractors, whoever you privately want to offer it to within your network. Many of you are probably here because you're interested, at least in some part, in the Windows piece of this. It's helpful to have a little bit of a historical context about where Windows was in the past to where it'll go in the future. I've got a question here. So the question was, how does this compare to Xamarin? So I will talk about this a little bit more later on. I will provide like a quick 20-second version of it, which is that both of them provide the ability to create cross-platform applications using a largely shared code base. The amount of code that you're able to share between Xamarin and Cordova is a little bit different. I think that one of the larger differences is going to be where you are most comfortable from a language perspective. If you're coming largely from a C# background, then you'll generally trend towards Xamarin. If you're coming from more of a web background, you'll tend a little bit more towards the Cordova side of things. Another question right here?
At what point do you need a Mac to build your Xcode project?
That is a great question as well. So the question was, at what point do you need a Mac in order to build your Xcode project? So you can create the Xcode project. So I'll go back by a slide here. So you can create the Xcode project. That's stage 2, if you will, there, the three larger boxes. It is when you actually need to package the Xcode project that you actually need a Mac. And we'll actually do that later on. We'll package it up for submission to the store, essentially. But that is an important point. Visual Studio does provide all of the tools that you need in order to build for iOS and Android and to create the project for iOS. Due to both, frankly, legal licensing restrictions and technology restrictions, it is required that you somewhere in the world have a Mac in order to build for iOS. Fortunately, there are a lot of great services out there that make it possible for you to either share a Mac in your office or to make use of a web service like, for example, PhoneGap we talked about earlier. We've been working lately with a service called Mac in Cloud that allows you to essentially rent a Mac in the cloud, oddly enough, for like, it's cheap. It's like $20 a month or something like that. It's very affordable. So yeah, we'll show more of that later on. Okay, so a little bit of historical context about kind of how the Windows platform got to where it is today. So let's rewind a little bit, and this time we don't have to take the Wayback Machine too far. We only have to go back by about a year. So prior to the summer of 2014, really prior to build of last year, we had, I think the kind way to say it is we had a plethora of choices when it came to platforms that we could build for Windows using Cordova. There was the Windows 8 platform, which really targeted desktop and tablets. There were the not so well maintained, but still out there, Windows 7 and 7.5 Windows Phone platforms. And then there was the Windows Phone 8 platform, which at the time, and actually still is, one of the dominant kind of platforms to be used out there, primarily because of the number of in-market devices using Windows Phone 8. Windows Phone 8, I do want to kind of mention here, is a slightly different architecture than the Windows 8 or the Windows 10 platform of today, in so much as Windows 8 and Windows 10, the JavaScript runs natively inside of Windows. The Windows Phone 8 platform is the only platform that actually runs inside of a web view. It's inside of a web view inside of a Silverlight application. Once again, this is a bit of a technical detail. It's fun to know what's under the hood, but this is not necessarily exposed to you as a developer. It's not something you have to worry about. By the time we got to build last year, and we had a largely converged platform, you could use the Windows platform, and that would deploy to both Windows 8 and 8.1 devices on desktop, and it would deploy to Windows Phone 8.1 devices. It was a single project. Technically speaking, it deployed 2 different packages to Windows Desktop and Windows Phone because the platform was not fully converged yet, but it's largely converged. We still carried forward the Windows Phone 8 platform because, once again, it's still a popular phone out there and there's a fair amount of market adoption. So here you'll see as we get to phase 2, and this is really kind of where we're at today or will be in the next couple of months with the Windows 10 platform finally reaching RTM. That Windows platform has now kind of consumed all the different target devices. You can use a single platform and deliver to desktop, tablet, phone, Xbox, big projected screen, even HoloLens once that finally comes out and everyone can see holograms using their cool Cordova app. It'll be awesome. The future, today, all right? So that Windows platform is what we're going to spend at least part of today looking at in greater detail from a code perspective. And I want to talk a little bit about what is in that Windows 10 platform to make it, well, frankly, attractive as a development platform. So, number one, because you're deploying to a native JavaScript application, you have access, and really a native Windows 10 application through Cordova, you have access to all of the same WinRT commands that you would if you were just building a Windows web application in the old Windows 8, 8.1 timeframe. So if you or your organization have an application that they're looking to port to maybe eventually gain broader adoption to iOS and Android, it's pretty easy for you to take that exact same application. I don't want to simplify it and say it's a copy and paste, but it's not too far away from it. And bring that into Cordova and then start to kind of broaden the reach from there. It also supports hosted apps. And this is a really cool thing and something we'll take a little bit closer look at later. Hosted apps essentially mean, back in the day when we were creating mobile web, it was great because we could just post all the new content up on a server. It would automatically get updated the next time someone hit refresh. When you create a local app, a packaged app, well, heck, it's like going to the printer with a new brochure or something like that. You got to package it up. You got to send it to the store. They've got to accept it and vet it and all that good kind of stuff. Wouldn't it be great if we could just get back to those days where you just updated on a server? Well, bada bing, bada boom. Hosted apps are your answer. Hosted apps essentially allow you to upload your app to a web server. You still deploy out a packaged application that people install. But when they open up that application, it is just kind of a window back to your web application. And by virtue of being hosted inside of a packaged application, sort of through the lens of a packaged application, you now have access to all of those device capabilities that you did not have access to as a mobile web application. So now you have access to the camera, the accelerometer, the device contacts, the file system, all that kind of stuff you now have access to. And that's really, really helpful. It is on a very stringent web standards roadmap. So on Windows 10, an important differentiation between Windows 10 and 8.1 applications. When you package for Windows 10, it makes use of the brand new Edge or Project Spartan, depending upon what name you know it under. It makes use of the new Spartan rendering engine, the new Edge rendering engine. And that is an evergreen rendering engine. So as Windows gets updates, so too will the rendering engine for your application. And so you'll have access to all of the latest CSS properties, all the latest JavaScript methods, all that good kind of stuff. And so you have something that looks a lot more like what you're probably already deploying to your web properties. If you're already optimizing for Firefox or Chrome or cross-browser compatibility, that means that you can take a lot of those same assets that you're putting on the web and just easily plop them right down inside of your Cordova app. It also has support for embedded Cordova apps. So what I mean by embedded is, picture it like this. Instead of a single web view in which your application lives, imagine multiple little islands of content, multiple web views. This can be really, really helpful for creating components in your application. In fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is the same application architecture that Amazon uses for their public consumer app. You can use JavaScript libraries that you love, that we all love and we all wanted to use inside of 8 and 8.1. So if you're familiar with the safe HTML restrictions that did not allow you to use inline script or did not allow you to use inner HTML or document.write, those restrictions have gone away. We've relaxed the restrictions, and so now you can use Angular, Bootstrap, jQuery, Knockout, whatever you want, unencumbered, without having to do awkward workarounds in order to make those frameworks kind of shoehorn into the framework. We're also working on the top 25 plugins. So since Windows 10 has not officially been supported yet, the plugins, those things which give you access to the native device capabilities, are still evolving. They're evolving with the platform. But by the time Windows 10 RTMs, you can expect us to have full support for all of the plugins that provide access to the core capabilities. Those are, you can think of them as the core building blocks for any application. They're many of the same capabilities that I've listed off previously. And then finally, WinJS. If you want to use WinJS, do it. Go for it. You do not have to use WinJS in a Cordova application. You can swing with whatever framework your organization is most familiar with. WinJS offers some benefits that I can pretty highly recommend, not just as a Microsoft employee, but as a kind of geek-tastic web developer. Their perf is blazing fast. We have put some of our best engineers on the WinJS team to make it super, super performant on mobile devices. It leaves almost every other framework that I know of in the dust. And it's compatible with a lot of other MV-Star frameworks. To the best of my knowledge, it is also the only framework that transitions seamlessly between touch devices and mouse-based devices, click-based devices. All right. That Windows 10 platform is available for prototyping today. We just released it a week ago. I'm going to show it to you today. And then for the RTM version of it, you can expect that along with Windows RTM in the summer. To get all of these tools, super easy. It comes with Visual Studio 2015 RC. Or if you're still on Visual Studio 2013, you can download an extension. Both of them are available on kind of the Visual Studio webpage. There are some subtle differences between 2015 and 2013 that we're going to look at here momentarily. Both of them. Oh, I have a question.
You answered one question, which was, are there significant differences between 13 and 15?
Mm-hmm.
For 15, will it be supported in the Express version of 2015 or whatever that ends up being called?
Gotcha. Okay, so kind of two-part question. First part was, are there differences between 2013 and 2015? Second part was, will it be included in the Express edition? So couple answers here. There are some subtle differences that are not dramatic, but important to know about between 2013 and 2015. I will walk you through the code on those in a minute. And will it be included in the Express edition? There actually isn't an Express edition in Visual Studio 2015. It got consolidated into what we call the Community Edition, but it is still the free edition, and that's what you really care about. That's what you care about. Yes, absolutely. It is available in the Community Edition. It's available all up. Every version of Visual Studio has it. It is one of the optional check marks during install. Oh, let's go back. So when you install Visual Studio, one more question. Is it compatible with Visual Studio Code? This is it's not a difficult question to answer, but it is qualified. So you can use Cordova projects with Visual Studio Code, but we have not built any special integration with Visual Studio Code. In fact, I'll use code a little bit later on. I would say that we have work to do in order to create first-class integration with code, but it is definitely interoperable with Visual Studio Code. With code, you'll probably want to depend upon the command line a little bit more and less upon the conveniences of point-and-click kind of stuff that you find in Visual Studio. Yep, awesome. So whether you're installing the extension for Visual Studio 2013 or you are installing Visual Studio 2015 RC, Visual Studio installs everything you need. And I know this doesn't really sound like a great, big, awesome thing, but trust me, if you've ever tried to set up an environment for open source development, specifically for Cordova, it is a pain in the derriere, pardon my French quite literally. So the screenshot that I have here shows, what is that, 7 or 8 different dependencies that are being installed. We've got the Android NDK, the Android SDK, we've got Apache Ant, Git CLI, Google Chrome, Java, Node. That's only about half of the list of actual dependencies that you have to install and configure to make Cordova possible. This is because you're building for multiple platforms. When you're building for multiple platforms, you need the build systems for each of those platforms. Because there are so many of them, because they are updating at their own cadence, because each one of them requires special configuration, it can typically take 1 to 2 days to actually get those installed, configured, up and running properly. When you install Visual Studio, we take a lot of that headache out for you. Granted, installation takes a long time. Hit install, go make yourself a sandwich, have a good time for the next hour or two. It will take a little while, but once it's all installed, it will be properly configured for you and you can go to town coding that morning. So That is a huge thing. And not only do we install it properly the first time, but we also have systems in place to monitor your dev environment so that if a new update becomes available that we have validated, or if somehow you accidentally misconfigure or change your machine's environment settings in some way to make it impossible to build, we'll let you know about it, and we'll help you get back on the right track. So that piece of helping you actually stay inside of a well-configured dev environment, for those who have gone through the pain of open source development, no, that's a huge thing. Okay, show me. Let's actually do it. Let's get to some code. Hopefully I'll get the right machine up here. Is 7 the right one? Wake up, little machine. Let's try 8. Maybe 8's the right one. Yeah? We got Visual Studio up? Fantastic. All right, cool. So, like I said, I'm going to go through a very simple application here. The important thing is to demonstrate the concepts. If, as we go through this, you guys have any questions or feel uncomfortable with some of the code I'm writing, stop me, ask me, we'll talk through it. We'll work through it together. All right, file, new project. Well, that's easy. We can all do that. We've got a bunch of different templates here for Cordova. In this particular case, I'm going to pick the simplest app because I don't want it to be confused by any of the frameworks. But we also have kind of pre-configured templates using some of the more popular UI control frameworks. In this particular case, Ionic and Onsen UI. All right. There we go. Okay. We go in here, and you guys have me as a guide, so you don't need to get started, but that's helpful once you actually get into it. So let's take a quick little tour through the project structure here, right? So the www folder, that is where you put all of your code. Remember we had earlier HTML, CSS, JavaScript, assets, all in yellow. This is the yellow piece. This is what you're actually going to be working inside of. And then also this config.xml. Because we're going to be working with Windows 10, we want to be on the latest version of Cordova. By default, the Visual Studio tools come with the last stable release of Cordova, which is 4.3. We're going to be living on the edge here, people, so we're going to update it to 5.0. Now, when I build, let's actually change it to build for Windows. I'm going to build locally. Local machine, debug, cool. What's actually happening here is that Visual Studio is going out to the interwebs. It is pulling down the latest version of Cordova from NPM and installing it on your local machine. Here we go. I've just launched the most basic Hello World app in Windows 10. It's a windowed app, just displaying my HTML content. Well, that's all fine and dandy. But at this point, we are still building a Windows 8.1 application. We want to tell it to build for 10. For this, I've got to step outside of Visual Studio for just a second. I want to step outside of Visual Studio because I'm going to use the command line to download our prototype or our in-development Windows 10 platform. Remember, this is only a temporary thing for the next couple of months until Windows 10 RTMs. Grab this guy here. Just changing directories to my project. Then I'm going to do Cordova platform remove Windows because I want to remove the old Windows 8 platform. It's going to think about it. It successfully did it. Then I'm going to do Cordova platform add Windows at https://aka.ms whack Cordova-win10. So just as when I built inside of Visual Studio and it automatically went out and acquired Cordova from NPM, that's pretty much the exact same thing that's happening here again, but just for the Windows platform, and it's just acquiring that Windows 10 prototype. Okay, so it finished. Let's make sure copying looks like it was successful. Hooray, hurrah, we are good. Okay, so now I can come back to Visual Studio, open up my config designer, go to the Windows platform, and now I can choose that I want to build for Windows 10. That should be the scariest moment that we have the entire demo. I know we went into command line territory. It's your friend. Okay, so now we're going to build for Windows 10, and let's do something interesting. Let's use the camera. I do have one question. Yeah.
Can you target both 8.1 and 10?
The question is, can you target both 8.1 and 10? And the answer is an unequivocal yes, absolutely. In fact, you'll see in the config, when I do code here in a second, where you can actually do that. It does require going into the actual XML for the config, but that ain't no thing. All right, so, did I have another question? Good? Excellent, all right. So, let's use a camera. For this particular instance, I am just going to borrow from the documentation, Cordova plugin camera. I will use Bing, and it will provide me with a quick link to the documentation here. A lot of the Cordova documentation is in GitHub, so the Visual Studio team also provides an abundance of supplementary documentation as well. Because the plugin itself is published by the Apache Foundation, the Apache Foundation and the GitHub site is the authority for documentation on this particular plugin. Going to go down here. We're just going to borrow a little bit of code here, and I'm going to explain exactly what this does. So Control-C. Let's go on over into our Solution Explorer. And this gives us an excellent opportunity to look at some of the JavaScript. Is the code big enough? Can everyone read? A little bit bigger? Yeah? I can do bigger. 130? More? I'll do one more, 140. All right. Too bad. Dang it. Can't win. You people are hard. All right. So, said we're going to copy and paste it in here, so let's do exactly that. And I'm going to scroll back to the top so we can walk through this. All right, so here's what's happening. First, we're putting everything inside of a private function so it doesn't sort of contaminate the global namespace. Just basic, fundamental, polite thing to do as a JavaScript developer. Next, we are adding an event listener, device ready. So what this is going to do, we're going to walk you through the application lifecycle, because the application lifecycle in Cordova is a tiny bit different than your application lifecycle in a web browser. It's really simple. Device ready is when your application initializes, right? It's the moral equivalent of on DOM ready or on load in your browser. To that, we're going to add on pause and on resume. On pause is when your application goes into the background, and then after about 2 minutes or so, depending upon the platform, it suspends, right? And so this is your last chance to save application state before your application quits running in the background. On resume, as you might imagine, is what happens when you kind of wake up your application out of the suspended state. We just copy-pasted 3 functions. This first one is an asynchronous call. This is actually going to make use of the camera plugin. Navigator.camera.getPicture basically says, send out an asynchronous call to the native code in iOS, Android, or Windows. When it returns back image data, it's going to return back it at quality of 50%. Okay, we don't need something that nice. And it's going to return it. In this particular case, I'm saying what the data type should be. And this is a base 64 encoded image. I could make it other things like, for example, a URI pointing back to the photo library. All of these things are documented in the plugins, and the documentation's really great. When it returns back this asynchronous call, it's going to call the onSuccess method. And in this particular case, I'm just going to grab an image that's already been put into the document, and I'm going to inject that base 64 encoded image into the source. If it fails, oh heck, it's not going to fail, so we don't need that. But if it were, it would just throw up an alert message. You'd probably want to do something slightly more responsible in an actual application. Now, we don't want to call this directly in line with the application when it initializes. We actually want to call that method when something sort of interesting happens, like when a button is clicked. So we're just going to do a document, get element by ID, call it camera.addEventListener. When we click on it, call a function, and inside of that, I'm just going to copy and paste that same thing that we're doing there. So now, whenever the button's clicked, it's going to invoke the asynchronous method. Everything makes sense so far? That seems pretty easy. We've done this before? Yeah? All right. So now, we do need two things back over here on our application. We need that button that we were creating. Take a photo. And we need that image that we were going to inject the base64 encoded data into. All right. So all that's great, but I do not yet have my plugin installed. I need to create a covenant with the application, a contract with the application that says, hey, this application declares its intent to use the camera. When you install, just like when you install Facebook and it says, hey, we want access to your contacts and your camera and your file system and your life and your wife and your kids, so too, in this case, is it going to say, do you want to have access to the camera? Yes, I trust this application. Go on. So we're going to go to plugins. And here we've got a list of, 25 to 30 or so plugins. These are called the core plugins. They are the plugins that are the basic building blocks of most applications. And all of these plugins have been both contributed to and vetted by Microsoft. In this particular case, we're going to use the camera plugin. When I hit add, it's going out via NPM, acquiring the plugin, installing it in my file system. It was successfully installed, and in fact, over here, if I look at my plugins directory, I can see that it was added right there. So that's where the code lives. You never need to crack that open, that's where it lives. Okay.
Somehow there's some JavaScript that's now going to be included that wasn't before.
Precisely. And so we'll actually see that when we look at the built project. You'll see that that JavaScript where it exists. In fact, I can show you, this is kind of an interesting point. The question was, and somewhere there's JavaScript that was not there before. So the API for the camera plugin is included inside of that directory that we just looked at. And then all of that will be compiled into a single JavaScript file later on. In fact, it is this, see this Cordova.js? That Cordova.js, if you look back in my dub folder, doesn't exist. That gets created at build time. All right, we have one more?
Yeah, you say Microsoft vetted these plugins for the Windows platform. Are there sibling plugins out there that we would need to do to go and build these projects for iOS?
That's a great question. So the question was, Microsoft vets these for the Windows platform. Are there similar plugins for iOS, Android, etc.? The answer is that in these plugins is encapsulated all the code necessary for Windows, iOS, and Android, and BlackBerry, and Chrome apps, and Firefox apps, I believe, as well. There's a few more as well. So we are actually vetting them. Frankly, we're vetting them primarily on Windows. We also do sanity testing on iOS and Android to make sure that they're compatible with those. The Cordova project is contributed to by a number of different organizations, Google being a major one of those, also Adobe, Intel, IBM, a bunch of those guys. And so there's a lot of scrutiny upon these plugins to make sure that they are as well as bug-free as that many eyes can ensure. All right? So there's nothing additional that you need to do to make these compatible with iOS and Android.
So everything that's within the www folder all gets then compiled to everything else. If we prefer to kind of control our own gulp builds, is that then retained outside of it?
Yeah. So the question was, if everything in the www folder is compiled, what if I want to control my pre- and post-build tasks via something like Grunt or Gulp? The answer is that this absolutely works with Grunt and Gulp. In fact, if at the end of this talk, I'll have a link to a bunch of tutorials and samples. Many of those make use of Grunt and Gulp tasks, so you can move stuff around before and after. Just make sure that whatever you want is included in that www folder at the actual build time. You can also, it's worth noting, customize your builds for each of the platforms, iOS, Android, and Windows, via this merges folder over here. This merges folder, you'll see that there's a folder for each one of the platforms. If you want to override the content for any one of those, you can do that. One more question. The question was, can we also use this for building BlackBerry applications? The answer is yes. However, we have not built in debugging features for BlackBerry, nor have we built in deploy from within Visual Studio. Having said that, you can go to the command line and deploy directly from there. You just wouldn't benefit from the debugging features. If people in the audience are interested in BlackBerry, please let us know. There just haven't been enough developers that have asked for it yet, frankly. One more question. The question is, can I use TypeScript? And absolutely. We provide templates for TypeScript as well as JavaScript because from a percentage perspective, more developers use JavaScript. And if you know JavaScript, or if you know TypeScript, then you also know JavaScript. I just did today's example using JavaScript. The question was, what's our roadmap for ECMAScript 6? And I'm going to defer that question until after the talk because that's a fairly large one and not essential to the Cordova piece of it, but an important part that my team is working on.
Do you get plugins for do you get IntelliSense?
The question is, do we get IntelliSense for the plugins? And absolutely we do. Let's see here. I will go back over here and just show that we get it. Navigator.camera, right? And then I get, well, in that particular case, I wasn't able to determine the stuff, but get picture, there we go, get picture. I'm not sure why I'm unable to get the completion piece there, but I do get it. Spell, oh, that's why. Oh, yeah, ha, there you go. Like, dang, this IntelliSense ain't working. That was embarrassing. Get picture. Navigator, still unable to get it. But the answer is yes, that we do. I'm not really sure what's going on there. Maybe I got a bug in my system. It's possible. Okay, let's get a little bit further. Because I dearly, dearly want to show you guys hosted apps, so let's get to that. All right, so save here. I've added in my camera plugin. Do you guys feel ready to build? Yes. Yeah, you feel ready to build? Let's do it. All right, the squirrels are running, the build is making, all right, so we got it up here, now we got our button, take a photo. Notice, if you look kind of behind here over into Visual Studio, I've got the debugger attached here. All the things that you would expect to work out of the debugger work. You can inspect elements, you can set breakpoints, manipulate them at runtime, all the stuff that you want to do there. But let's go ahead and take a photo. Oh, ah. All right, so now, okay, so it returns it back to the application. And look over here in this guy. That's my base64 encoded image right there. If you guys can read that, you're better developers than I. But that translates to me making a scary face, right? So we now have access to native device capabilities. That's great. In fact, we all also now have offline support because all of this is being packaged up and with the application and installed directly on the user's machine. Now, the benefit to that is that if there's no Wi-Fi connection or no 3G or 4G or LTE or any of that good kind of stuff, the application still works, and that's money. But there's times at which you want to be able to update the application without necessarily having to resubmit to the store. I had a question here-ish.
Yeah, it sounded like you were going to answer it, but if you choose to do the online deployment of your code,
Yep.
if the device goes offline, does it cache the latest?
It is possible to do that. It requires significantly more work. Definitely possible. Lots of developers do it, but you're going to have to write some code, right? One more question. The question was, does this integrate with mobile app services, or Azure mobile app services? Yeah, and the answer is yes. In fact, if you use the Connected Services Manager, it will walk you through connecting to Zumo and all that good kind of stuff in lots of different ways, provide you with some nice scaffolding that you can use, and be productive that way. So, okay. So let's actually do that online version of it. Let's actually make it so that we can deploy to a web server, but still have access to all those native device capabilities and all that goodness. For that, we actually have to crack open our config.xml. So let's do that. I'm going to crack open config.xml, and I'm actually going to edit the code here directly. What I'm going to do is, we don't want it to be kind of a wide open to the full network. We want to say exactly which properties have access to our application. So I'm going to use this little property here called allow navigation. Just set an href, super simple. And in this case, I'm just going to use my personal website because I'm cool like that. And I'm just going to say everything originating from this particular URI has access to native device capabilities in my app. Okay, so that's all there now. Good there. Now, we actually want to be able to navigate over to that web URL. So let's open up index.html. And here, I'm just going to create a simple little hyperlink. http ryanjsalva.com. Oops. Ignite. Good. And to the interwebs. Cool. All right, so now we can navigate there. And do we need anything else here? I think we're probably good. So I'm going to go ahead and launch to my local machine. And now we should have a nice link to the interwebs up here. All right, that's awesome. So we need to actually have something on the interwebs. So let us navigate to our folder. We're going to go to the platforms. So this is just my project, right? Then I'm going to platforms, Windows, and I'm going to grab that stuff out of the www folder. Remember earlier how you were asking, is there some new JavaScript that gets created somewhere? You can see it right here. That's Cordova.js and Cordova plugins.js. That's the compiled version of all the plugins that I just added. And Cordova.js dynamically loads Cordova plugins.js. Yeah. 1.21K, and, oh, I was there, 52K. And remember, because this is loading from a local package, it's actually, there's no download time, right? It's automatically there. All right, so we got all that stuff there. I'm going to modify this just a little bit because I want to make it clear that we're actually in the website and not on the local package. So in this case, I'm actually going to edit with Visual Studio Code. And in this particular case, I don't want this to link to the web because I'm already on the web. I want to go back to the local application. So I want to switch fluidly between web and local package, web, local package. So, oh, yeah, sorry. I actually haven't zoomed using code before. View, zoom in, control plus equals. Hey, can we see it now? Yeah? Good. I learned something new today. Brackets. All right, MS-Apex Web, and we're going to go to www.wackindex.html. Remember that all my web content in Cordova is in the www folder. We're just going to go back to the index page for that. All right, and another thing to remember here is that's 3 slashes, not 2 slashes. That is an idiosyncrasy of using the MS-Apex. Is that a domain protocol, I guess? Okay, cool. So now we got that in there. And let's also make it really blatantly obvious that we're in here. Let's also background. Nothing says Oh, I have to be in body. Body, whack. Nothing says web like light coral. Don't you guys agree? It is the color of the web. All right. All right, I think we got everything here. Yeah, we're good. So now we're just going to upload. This is the exact same application that was in our local package. We're just going to put it up on the web server. All right, so let's go to ye old web server, and I'm just using a cheesy FTP kind of thing here to upload it directly. Keep things simple. This is where I was testing it earlier. I'm going to go ahead and delete those all out of there. And then these are the assets that I was going to copy over. And now it's just going to upload them real quick. So here we've got our application. And as soon as this guy finishes copying up, it may take a second. Go, pneumatic tubes, go. Money. All right, we're there. So I should be able to go to the interwebs. Hey, now I'm on the interwebs. I should be able to take a photo. And now we got a photo. So still access to all the device capabilities, but all through the mobile web, just like it was 2010. Yay, right? Okay, cool. So that takes us through effectively how to use Windows 10 and hosted applications. But I promised you guys that I would also show you how things work with Android and iOS, because this is not just about building Windows 10 applications. Hell no. This is about building cross-platform applications. So let's actually switch on over to our other device here. And this particular one, I've got Visual Studio 2013 installed. So this is using the extension, and this will highlight maybe some of the subtle differences between the two. Everybody like my dog? All right. And in this particular instance, I am running Windows inside of Parallels on my Mac. So I've got both Windows and Mac up simultaneously, right? I also have here, for those of you that can see it, I've got a Nexus 7 that's on my desk here, and it is connecting or projecting to my desktop using a fun little app called MobaZen, which basically just allows for projection onto my desktop. So good stuff. Oh, really? I've got to actually enter in a thing here. Has ended. Here we go. It's going to make me enter in a code. 581534.
Are there emulators built into
Yeah.
the plugin?
The question is, are there emulators built into the plugin? So there are emulators built into the tools. So for example, there's a Visual Studio Android emulator. There are many emulators provided by the community. Genymotion provides an Android emulator. The Android SDK also provides an emulator, or ADK provides an emulator. For iOS, you were pretty much limited to using either what is called the Ripple emulator, and Ripple is an emulator that runs inside of the Chrome browser. The advantage to it is that, well, frankly, it's pretty fast because it's just inside of the Chrome browser, but it lacks the fidelity that you get out of a true emulator or a device. So good for roughing out your application, less good for final testing. All right. So I've got an application up here that's pretty much the exact same one that we had before. This time, though, instead of deploying to Windows, I'm going to deploy to Android. One thing that I will call your attention to over here on the, oh, no, thank you. One thing that I will call your attention to over in the Solution Explorer, there is no dub folder in the Solution Explorer in Visual Studio 2013. Your project root is the equivalent of your www folder. The reason for that is that between 2013 and 2015, we changed the project system to use the ASP.NET 5 style project system that is based upon the file system. This means that in Visual Studio 2015, you can use Grunt and Gulp and Bower and NPM and all that good kind of stuff. In Visual Studio 2013, it is not so easy. So if you need or want to integrate with node-based tools, you probably want Visual Studio 2015. I had a question up here.
Is there a way to install the Windows Phone or device emulator on a Mac?
The question was, is there a way to install the Windows Phone emulator on a Mac? You can do it by installing Windows on Parallels on a Mac. I do not know of a way to install it natively on a Mac. Okay, so, oh, one more?
Yeah, just on the emulator question. So, do you also have or thinking about going forward providing a design pad that I'm able to design the screens and the forms and the flows without writing the code, but automatically the code gets generated, I can still get into the code?
Sure. So the question was, are we intending, or is it on our roadmap to create visual design tools that do not require coding, but essentially allow you to kind of drag and drop, construct, design an application? It is not on our roadmap today. If we have enough user feedback calling for it, it's certainly something that we will provide. We do work with Ionic. The Ionic framework has a tool called, I believe they call this one, is this Ionic Labs? What is this one called? I forget what this product is called. It's part of the Ionic family. And they do have a visual constructor, and we are compatible with their tools, so you can then take the export from that and have it work inside of Visual Studio. Another question?
Something for future for Sienna, kind of a design pad that generates AngularJS and
Yeah. So Project Sienna is essentially the companion, and it does create Cordova applications. Today, you cannot crack those open using Visual Studio. It is absolutely on our path to converge with Sienna and provide converged tooling there. I think that the question of whether or not you'll be able to round trip between Sienna and Visual Studio is an interesting one, and one that we're starting to investigate but haven't fully developed yet. Okay, so let's actually deploy here. We're going to go to Android, prove that it can be done. In this particular case, we're just going to deploy to the device. I could deploy to the Android emulator included with Visual Studio here. In this particular case, I'm just deploying to the device instead. Yeah. So the debug tools work against anything and everything. So if you launch to a device, sure, cool. You can debug against that, whether it's iOS, Android, or Windows. If you launch to an emulator, great. You can debug against that in Visual Studio as well. If you launch to a browser, you can go there as well. Oh, deployment errors. No. I might have missed something here. Output, skipping build, running command. Am I missing something here? No device is found. Oh, it's not finding the device. Well, that's odd. I guess I can try unplugging and restarting it. All right, because we're running a little bit short on time and I don't want to do the dance of unplugging the USB and whatnot, for the Android at least, take it from my word that you can deploy to the device. It's not too difficult, but sometimes they can be a little bit finicky and lose connection with the application, and you just need to unplug it, replug it again. Let's do it to iOS, though, because that one is a little bit interesting in terms of how you connect to it. And in this particular case, I am deploying to a Parallels device, so it's on the same machine that Visual Studio is on. But these same principles would apply whether I was deploying to a Mac that was in my kind of local network or one that was out on the cloud as well, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to the Mac side of things. And here I'm going to start up this little application called VSMDA Remote. This is essentially just a listening agent that runs inside of Node, and its only job in this world is to listen for Visual Studio to call out, "I have a build for you." And when it does, it will federate that build over to Xcode. Xcode will perform the build. And in this particular case, we're just going to marshal it out to the iOS simulator. So first, I have to start it up. Now, the remote build agent is listening. Now I need to tell Visual Studio what IP address it's at. It's at 10.5.39.23. Everybody remember that, 10.5.39.23. And, oh, look, I already had it set up. It's already pointing to 10.5.39.23. That is a configuration found under the Tools for Apache Cordova Remote Agent Configuration. So, should be good. Now all I need to do is change my deploy target to iOS. We're going to do it to the iOS simulator. Hit build. If we come back over here, oops, yoink, you'll see that the remote build agent is starting to churn out. It's receiving the build. And it's just going to send that package, that Xcode package, over to Xcode to be built, and then to the iOS simulator to run. Here it is, coming up. Same kind of thing. I can take a picture. I've got one saved on my device here of Godzilla, because Godzilla's awesome. And back over here, I've got my debugger set up. I can hit breakpoints, I can inspect, I can change the DOM, I can do any of that good kind of stuff. I can make it background light coral, because it's also the color of iOS, and there you go. So all the debugging works. All right, so we're narrowing in on the end of this. The question was, iOS does not stop me from doing the web view. Clarify for me for a moment.
So you've got a container with a web view, and you've got code on the iOS device, but you've also got code up at Ryan's.
Oh, using the hosted app model. So the question was, can I still use the hosted app model with iOS? The answer to that is yes. Only on, I think it's iOS 8, I believe. It may be 7. I forget which version they actually start allowing it. So it doesn't go back to the beginning of time, but on recent devices. Okay, so to try this out, if you want to use Windows, you need Windows 10 Technical Preview. If you want to build for Windows 10, you need Windows 10 Technical Preview. If you just care about 8 and 8.1, then you only need Windows 8, 8.1. Beyond that, for Windows 10, you need Visual Studio 2015 RC. For everything else, you can just use Visual Studio 2013. It's only with Visual Studio 2015 that you can build for Windows 10. Windows 8 and 8.1, you can build with both 2013 and 2015. It is different depending upon, actually no, it's the same. It's different depending upon your version of Cordova. I believe now it's 6, if I'm not mistaken, for everything 4.0 and above. Does that make sense? Yeah, so the question was, what Xcode version do you need? And a lot of it depends upon the version of Cordova that you're using. In Visual Studio 2015, you can switch your version of Cordova and to anything as far back as 2.3. So back in 2.3, 2-3 years ago, the version of Xcode that you would have used was like Xcode 2, right? So it depends there. And this is a place where documentation is your best friend. So I have one more question here.
Yeah. Is there a good way to follow different style guides for iOS, Android?
So the question was about style guides. Let me defer that one until a little bit later on. I got like 2 slides that I want to make sure we get through, and I think that one is a big one that a lot of people will have Mondo questions over.
Any plan to support crosswalk?
The question was, is there support of crosswalk? For those that don't know, crosswalk is a mechanism for packaging Chrome with your application so that inside of the Android ecosystem, You don't have to worry about the fragmentation of versions of Chrome that are that render your application. There are a lot of end-market devices that are using Chrome version 30 and 32, and if you don't want to deal with that kind of fragmentation, it can be helpful to package with a known version of Chrome. Crosswalk enables that. So we have not completed our validation with Crosswalk. We expect to complete our validation within the next, I'd call it probably 3 months. So it is imminent, but today I cannot guarantee that it works. It should work, but I can't guarantee that it works.
How about actually some of the platform capabilities are different across iOS, Android, and maybe Windows. For example, in iOS you have the fingerprint, native device capability.
So the question was, what about capabilities that are specific to those platforms? How does Cordova handle that? That's an excellent question. The basic idea is that the plugins do their best to normalize across all of the platforms. So camera is an easy one because the camera is a pretty standard kind of thing. Something like fingerprint recognition, which is relatively unique to iOS. I don't know if there are any Android devices that do it, but it's pretty unique. There is a plugin for that, but that plugin only works on iOS, right? So not all plugins work for all devices. You should always, within your app, be responsible, do device capability testing before you invoke a method to make sure that it is available on the device that it's being used. That's just good dev practice, period.
Does Cordova support background processing, like sending notifications if the app isn't open?
Does Cordova support background notifications and processes? So it's actually a slightly different question about notifications versus background processes. Yes, it supports notifications. In fact, I believe that we have a video posted online of how to use push notifications and the like. Background processes, there's actually a plugin that was just released today that builds upon capabilities in Android. We are now in the process of building out those capabilities for iOS and Windows. So imminent. Awesome. All right, I wanted to make sure we did have a gentleman, maybe it was you, sir, that asked about Xamarin earlier. I forget who it was, but kind of what's the difference between Cordova and Xamarin? So here's a great way to think about it. Use Cordova if you are familiar with web technologies. Use it if you've already got web applications that you think could be enhanced with native device capabilities or offline support. Use it if you want to maintain just a single code base and not really have to worry about having to customize it significantly for each of your target platforms. Use Cordova if you've got JavaScript libraries that you love. It's not going to work in a Xamarin world or in a native world. If you're productive using Angular or React or Backbone or Knockout, or back in the day I used MooTools a lot, use those. Use Cordova. But for a native app, you might be better off going the native route if you're trying to develop an app that's going to be in, you're targeting to be the top 5% of apps. If you're trying to create a super premium experience, invest the extra time, money, effort, maintenance costs, and developing native apps for each one of the target platforms. There's absolutely good reasons to do it. If you want different apps for different devices, if you want to diverge your code base for each of the ecosystems, Cordova is going to provide you with a unified code base. Yeah, you could create a different version for each ecosystem, but it kind of nullifies the benefit of being able to work with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If your heart belongs to Java, if you are in love with Objective-C, for God's sakes, man, stick with the languages you love. Use those. If you're into XAML, C#, go use Xamarin. It also enables you to build cross-platform applications. The code share is a little bit less, and the approach to it is a bit different, but it is absolutely a worthwhile platform. There's no there's no competition here. There's no hard choice. It just depends upon what your starting point is. And last, I'm going to kind of leave you guys with this. Like my teenage niece says, are you guys totally for cereal about this? Totes, absolutely, yeah. Like Cordova is a major, major investment for us. We've had a large development team working on it for the last year. In that year, we've had about 6 different releases. We've contributed to everything from building new command line interfaces, not hundreds, dozens of plugins, an improved build system for iOS. We're out there making open source contributions left and right to make sure that the platform itself is reliable, is secure, is enterprise ready. And so we're committed to making this platform work all up. I'm not going to read off these, a long list of contributions that we've made in the last year to open source. If you're interested about any of these or you want to contribute to these projects, because Lord knows we love community participation, I encourage you to come up and talk to me after the talk. And as a result of all this, we do see adoption from a lot of big companies. We've got Salesforce. We are working with a number of large financial institutions, health institutions, and food and safety inspection organizations as well to build apps. Cordova, it's real, it's out there, it's today, and it's not just us that are working on it. The platform itself has the backing of Intel, IBM, Google, Android, and hundreds of other independent developers. It's a very, very active project and one that we're committed to kind of making easy for Visual Studio developers. There's a list of resources here. I won't bother kind of reading through them, but please find them online afterwards. Take a photo now. I will be hanging around. We are just right about at time, so I'm more than happy to stick around. This is the last talk of the day, so we got time for questions. But before everyone jets off, I do want to encourage you to please, please, please evaluate the session. I speak often and depend upon your feedback to improve. Give me the good and the bad, and tell me what I can do to make you guys more successful as developers and as IT pros. So thanks so much.